Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of the Law of Self-Defense. I am, of course, attorney Andrew Branca for the Law of Self-Defense. And today we have for you a story of road rage out of Port St. Lucie, Florida. I used to spend my summers in Port St. Lucie, Florida when I was a kid. But imagine this. You're driving along. Your wife is in the passenger seat beside you when a car swerves around your vehicle with the driver pointing a handgun at you. Then that driver cuts you off, brakes to a stop, blocks your path. The driver jumps out with that gun in hand as he angrily approaches your vehicle, spewing profanities. You've got your own gun in hand as well, out of sight, in your lap, but in your hand. What do? Do you shoot that guy in the face? Do you attempt to back your vehicle away or drive around him? Can you drive faster than a bullet? Do you just be patient? Join us today and we'll take a look at this video and discuss our tactical and legal options. Of course, I should mention today's content is brought to us by our longtime partner, CCW Safe, a provider of legal service memberships, what many people mistakenly call self-defense insurance. In effect, CCW Safe promises to pay their members legal expenses if they're involved in a use of force event, and they do much, much more. There are a number of companies out there that offer this kind of service. The best fit for me is CCW Safe. I'm personally a member. My wife, Emily, is personally a member, and I trust them to do the right thing. If you'd like to learn why I trust CCW Safe, you can point your browser to lawofselfdefense.com/trust. I have a brief video there where I explain exactly why CCW Safe is the best fit for me and perhaps the best fit for you. At that same URL, lawofselfdefense.com/trust, there's also a 10% discount code you can use when you become a member of CCW Safe as well. Again, that's lawofselfdefense.com/trust. So today's video is of a road rage incident that occurred August 20th, so not long ago, in Port St. Lucie, Florida, between the driver of a black Mercedes and a married couple in a white pickup truck. The Mercedes driver appears to be the unlawful initial aggressor in this confrontation. He angrily approaches the truck with a gun in hand, and apparently unknown to the Mercedes driver, the truck driver also has a gun in hand, held out of sight between his legs. The truck driver's wife records the encounter on her cell phone, which is what we'll be taking a look at today. And by the way, folks, if you stay to the end of today's show, I will explain to you how you can get your very own free copy of our best-selling book, The Law of Self-Defense Principles. You can check it out on Amazon, 5-star reviewed, bestseller in its class, but don't buy it on Amazon. They'll charge you for the book and shipping and handling. We only ask you to cover the cost of shipping the book to you. Learn how to get your free copy at the end of today's show. So, before we jump into the video, which is only about 44 seconds long, let's take a look at this quick summary of the confrontation that was provided by the Port St. Lucie Police Department. So here is that. They write, and this is a tweet, "Armed road rager arrested for several felonies. Yesterday around 4:30 p.m., Port St. Lucie Police Department responded to the 1200 block of Southwest Briarwood Drive regarding a road rage incident. The investigation revealed that 63-year-old Paul Slane drove his black Mercedes aggressively around the victim's truck while pointing a handgun at the two victims, and then stopped in front of them in the roadway. Slane exited his vehicle with a handgun in his hand, approached the adult driver, and struck him through the open window. He also struck the adult passenger, this would be the wife, while demanding her to give him her cell phone due to her recording the incident. Slane fled the scene but was located by deputies from the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office a short while later. The handgun used in the incident was recovered. Port St. Lucie Police Department arrested Slane for 2 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, attempted armed robbery, and 2 counts of simple battery. By the way, folks, under Florida's rather strict 10-20 life gun sentencing enhancement law, this gentleman Slane is looking at a mandatory minimum of 16 years in prison. He's 63 years old. That would mean if convicted, and based on this evidence, it's a pretty easy conviction, he's not out of prison until he's 79. For what? Slane is currently housed at the St. Lucie County Jail with no bond, and there is his mugshot photo. So, we'll also see at one point in the video that the husband driver of the truck, again, has his own pistol in his hand, held between his legs. He never raises the gun to point it at the Mercedes driver. Notably, and most of the video I have has been muted out. I got it from the Port St. Lucie Police Department, and they removed the audio from the video file. But I did find one little clip of audio that I edited back in which the truck driver can be heard asking his wife, "Should I shoot him?" Meaning, of course, the Mercedes driver. I should mention that I've heard the wife was herself a former police officer. Now, eventually, the Mercedes driver gets back into his own car and drives away. As we saw, he was later arrested on a variety of charges, most of them felonies. And with that context in mind, let's go ahead and watch the actual video of this encounter. Let's see if I can make it a little bigger. There we go. Let's go ahead and start the videotape. Again, most of this is muted. Here he comes. He's got the gun in hand. Having profanities, getting closer. Reaches in for the driver. Gun up. Angry, pointing. Grabs for the cell phone of the wife. More jawing, more profanity. There's the gun in the pickup driver's lap. Probably never seen by the Mercedes driver. And then he walks off and gets in his car and drives away. I had mentioned I had edited in the pickup truck driver asking his wife if he should shoot this guy, and I guess I actually neglected to do that. But I can tell you, he asks his wife that question, "Should I shoot him?" right about here. So just as this dude is walking up to the bumper of their pickup truck with a gun in hand, the driver of this pickup, with his own gun in his lap, asks his wife, "Should I shoot this guy?" So, what should this pickup driver have done? Should he have shot the Mercedes driver? If so, at what point in this interaction? As soon as the Mercedes driver walked up, gun in hand? When the Mercedes driver reached in and appeared to strike the driver, the armed pickup truck driver? When the Mercedes driver reached in again and attempted to grab the wife's cell phone? Under these circumstances, by the way, that is an attempted felony armed robbery, and he's been charged with this now, attempted felony armed robbery. That's a forcible felony under Florida law. And under Florida law, you're privileged to use deadly force in defense against a forcible felony, even independent of a self-defense claim. Now, first, of course, the usual caveats that I always share with all of you. We should always seek to avoid getting into fights we don't need to get into. The risks of the fight are always greater than zero. There's a greater than zero risk of dying in the fight and a greater than zero risk of spending the rest of your life in prison, even if you do everything legally right. If the pickup driver goes to his gun, well, maybe he misses. And the Mercedes driver shoots back and maybe he hits either the pickup truck driver or the driver's wife. There's no magic pixie dust that says the good guy wins the fight. And it's always true that you could do everything legally correct, and the cops, the prosecutor, the judge, the jury could simply see things differently and decide to convict you regardless. Innocent people get convicted all the time. Now, there are things in life worth those risks. There are threats worth dying over. And there are threats worth spending the rest of your life in prison over to neutralize those threats. Exactly what those things are that make the risk of death and the risk of prison worth it is something only you can decide for yourself. I'd suggest, however, that the prudent person's list of things that are worth death or prison should be pretty short, a pretty abbreviated list, and well thought out long before the fight actually threatens and the use of force decision has to be made. The legal question here is, as usual, fairly straightforward. The pickup truck driver here would be legally privileged to use deadly force in defense of himself and or his wife in order to neutralize a reasonably perceived imminent unlawful threat of deadly force harm from the Mercedes driver, and also, as I mentioned, under Florida law, to prevent or stop a forcible felony, like this attempted felony armed robbery of the wife's cell phone. A strong argument can be made that the Mercedes driver presented as a reasonably perceived imminent threat of unlawful deadly force harm to both the pickup truck driver and his wife the moment he began approaching the pickup truck with a pistol in hand, arguably the moment he first swerved around the pickup truck while pointing a gun at the truck driver and his wife. Further, as the Mercedes driver is approaching the pickup with a gun in hand, the occupants of the pickup would be in reasonable fear of deadly force harm. That's the very purpose of what the Mercedes driver is doing, right? He's approaching with a gun visible in his hand to strike fear into the hearts of the pickup truck driver and his wife. And that conduct satisfies the legal criteria for the crime of felony aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. In fact, the police would ultimately charged the Mercedes driver with 2 counts of felony aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Also, when the Mercedes driver attempted to seize the wife's cell phone, as we saw, presumably to secure the recording of his own misconduct, while he had a gun in hand, that obviously satisfies the legal criteria for the crime of felony attempted armed robbery. And he would ultimately be charged with 1 count of felony attempted armed robbery. Each of the 3 charges for these forcible felonies would provide the truck driver with a legal privilege to use deadly force entirely independent of the need to justify that use of force as defense of self or others, simply on the basis of Florida's allowance for the use of deadly force to prevent or stop a forcible felony. Had the pickup truck driver shot the Mercedes driver, been criminally charged for that shooting, and were I consulting on his legal defense, those are exactly the legal justification arguments I'd be making on his behalf. Defense of self, defense of others, his wife, and defense against forcible felony. And those would be extremely robust defense arguments under Florida law and on the indisputable facts of this case. Does that mean this truck driver would have 0 risk of being convicted? No. And if he were convicted, he'd be looking at spending much of the rest of his life in prison. So again, those are the risks: dying in the gunfight and spending much of the rest of one's life in prison. Here, the truck driver decided to not shoot. The Mercedes driver ultimately drove away, and nobody ended up with a gunshot wound or dead. A good ending. But of course, the truck driver could not know that this would be the good ending at the moment he had to make the use of force decision. Indeed, the truck driver's uncertainty at the, ambiguity of the situation is evident when he asks his wife, "Should I shoot him?" Had the pickup driver shot the Mercedes man, I'd not been unsympathetic. A reasonable person in the truck driver's position could well have perceived an imminent threat of unlawful deadly force harm, as well as forcible felonies in progress, and correctly believe that Florida law allows for the use of deadly defensive force in either of those circumstances. After all, this confrontation could have ended not really any differently than another perfectly lawful shooting involving an essentially identical circumstance that many of you may have seen elsewhere. Very similar situation, road rage, man gets out of a car, approaches a pickup truck with a gun in hand, but the ending is quite different. Let's take a look. That guy, that road rager, just caught rounds in the face. That day ended poorly and permanently for him. That's how this Port St. Lucie road rage could have ended too. I also can't criticize the pickup truck driver for believing that perhaps he had the luxury to be patient and see how things developed. He was in the hot spot, not me, and perhaps he felt there was reason to believe that he was not yet compelled to risk death for himself or his wife in a gunfight, or to risk a decades-long prison sentence. If I have one criticism of the pickup truck driver, it's when he asks his wife, "Should I shoot him?" Folks, that's not really a question you should be asking someone else in the midst of the fight. That's a question you should have asked and answered for yourself, at least in the hypothetical, long before you found yourself having to make the real life use of force decision. And then in the moment, asking yourself that question again within the context of having thoroughly considered it long beforehand. Am I prepared to shoot and kill someone, to risk death in a gunfight, to serve decades in prison, if I'm in my truck with my wife and approached by an armed man in this circumstance? The time to really think hard on that question is long before you find yourself having to come up with an answer in the moment of crisis. It's also worth mentioning that most of the use of force cases I consult on involve clients who, at least theoretically, had off-ramps from the superhighway of presenting a gun that they might have taken with a little foresight. Could the pickup have driven to a local police station, for example? Perhaps the Mercedes driver would have been less inclined to act out in this fashion in front of a parking lot full of patrol cars. Could the pickup driver have simply hopped onto nearby I-95 and started driving, compelling the Mercedes to either engage in a long pursuit or choose to stop threatening the pickup? Now, I'm not saying these specifically were options the pickup driver should have chosen. I wasn't there. But I do suggest that each of us be prepared to apply this kind of foresight and consider these kinds of options when possible to try to achieve a resolution of these confrontations before they get to the guns out level. As for the Mercedes driver, again, he's since been arrested and charged with 2 counts of felony aggravated assault, as well as a charge of attempted felony armed robbery, all with a gun. And as I mentioned earlier, under Florida's 1020 life gun sentencing framework, he's looking at 16 years mandatory minimum, no discretion of the judge, no possibility of early release if he's convicted. And the evidence here supports that conviction. Frankly, if a prosecutor wants him convicted on those charges, this would be a hard case for the state to screw up. So the only way this Mercedes driver avoids a mandatory minimum 16 years is if the prosecutor is feeling beneficent that day. Any reason any of you see why a prosecutor should feel that way on the facts of this case? Would feel that way? Incidentally, the Mercedes driver, as I mentioned, is 63. He'll be 79 before he's released if he gets that mandatory minimum 16. He'll have spent what are probably the last fully enjoyable years of his life in a prison cell, hanging out with some very unpleasant people. All over what? What may have been just a few moments of poor judgment and poor emotional control? How about we just not do that? It's still better than having been shot and killed by the pickup truck driver, I suppose, which, as we just saw, is a real risk. But 16 years in prison for nothing is not anything I'd want to be looking at myself. All right, folks, I promised you I'd share how to get a free copy of our best-selling book, The Law of Self-Defense Principles. And you can get that straightforward enough at lawofselfdefense.com/free book. Lawofselfdefense.com/free book. Again, you can check it out on Amazon, 5-star reviewed, but Amazon will charge you for the book and shipping and handling. We only ask you to cover the cost of shipping the book to you. Get your book for free. Law of Self-Defense Principles, your handbook for being hard to convict if you're ever compelled to use force in defense of yourself, your family, or your property. Get it for free at lawofselfdefense.com/free book. All right, folks, with that, I'll go ahead and wrap up today's show. Just reminding all of you that if you carry a gun so you're hard to kill, if you carry a knife so you're hard to kill, if you carry pepper spray so you're hard to kill, if you study jujitsu so you're hard to kill, I do all those things. So I'm hard to kill, so my family is hard to kill. If you do any or all of that, then you also owe it to yourself and your family to make sure you know the law so you're hard to convict as well. Until next time, I remain Attorney Andrew Branca for the Law of Self-Defense. Stay safe.